the Gospel of Mark.
It really is the action movie of the New Testament. It is breathless, it's urgent, and it presents a hero who is constantly on the move. But the whole thing is held together by this incredible tension the hero conquers, not by defeating his enemies with a sword, but by giving his life for them.
Welcome to the OpenBibleLab podcast. I was looking over our notes for today, and, on the surface, this looks like the shortest, maybe the simplest account of Jesus's life. But as we're digging into the research, simple just feels like the completely wrong word.
Simple is definitely the wrong word. Intense. Absolutely. Subversive. Without a doubt. If you are used to thinking of biblical text as, slow, stained glass window kinds of experiences, very serene and quiet, this particular book is going to completely shatter that image.
Right, because it moves so fast.
It moves at a breakneck speed. The camera angles are sharp. The scenes change rapidly. There's almost no downtime. The main character is moving from one crisis straight into another. It rushes you along until it suddenly slams on the brakes and asks you, the listener, this single haunting question: who do you say that I am?
That is the central paradox, isn't it? The power in weakness. And that's our mission today. We are exploring the shortest, likely the earliest, and perhaps the most dramatic account we have. We want to understand not just what happens, but why it happens the way it does. We want to really get into the mind of the author and the shoes of the original audience.
And that context changes everything. It turns a story you might have heard 1,000 times into something that feels dangerous and brand new.
So let's start where we always do with these ancient texts. The text itself doesn't actually sign a name. You don't open the scroll and see a byline on page 1. It's technically anonymous. So who actually wrote this? And, well, how do I know?
You're right, the text is anonymous, which was actually quite common for ancient historical writings or biographies. The focus was meant to be entirely on the subject, not a person holding the pen. They just didn't have the same obsession with authorship that we do today.
Right, they weren't worried about copyright or branding.
Exactly. However, the title, According to Mark, or kaidamarkon in the Greek, was attached to this document very, very early on. We aren't just making a blind guess here.
How early are we talking, though? Because sometimes these traditions develop centuries later.
We have testimony from the early church leaders, specifically a man named Papias. He was a bishop writing around the early 2nd century, maybe around 120 or 130 AD. But he's recording traditions that go back much earlier. So we are talking about a guy who knew people who knew the original followers of Jesus.
Okay, that's a pretty tight chain of custody. It's not like a game of telephone spanning 1,000 years.
Right. And Papias identifies the author as John Mark. Now, John Mark is a fascinating character in his own right. He wasn't just a random scribe. He shows up in the book of Acts. He was a cousin of Barnabas, who was a major leader early on. And Mark actually traveled a bit with the Apostle Paul on his early journeys.
Wait, was he the one who abandoned them? I remember reading something about a big dispute.
Yes, that's him. In Acts, we learn that John Mark went with Paul and Barnabas on their first mission trip. But when things got tough, he left them and went back home. Later, Barnabas wanted to bring him along again, and Paul essentially said, no way. It actually caused a major split between Paul and Barnabas.
So the author of this incredibly important document started out as a bit of a flake.
He had a very rocky start, yeah. He was a young man who maybe just wasn't ready for the rigors of that life. But the beautiful thing is that later on, in letters written near the end of Paul's life, Paul specifically asks for Mark and says he's useful to him. So there was a full restoration there. But here is the really crucial part regarding this specific text. Papias tells us that Mark was Peter's interpreter.
Peter. As in the fisherman. The rock.
The very same. The big, impulsive personality of the group. The tradition is that Mark wasn't necessarily an eyewitness to every single event himself, but he was with Peter later on in Rome. He was recording the preaching, the stories, and the memories of Peter.
That actually makes so much sense when you read it. It has a very specific flavor to it that feels incredibly personal.
Why do you say that? What jumps out at you?
Well, just the vividness of it. It has these little details that feel like specific memories, not just general historical summaries. Like, it doesn't just say they sat on the grass, it says they sat on the green grass. Or it mentions Jesus was asleep in the boat specifically on a cushion. It just feels like someone remembering a scene.
Precisely. Scholars call those autoptic details, details from an eyewitness. It's the difference between saying he was sad and saying he sighed deeply in his spirit. The text is full of those sighs and specific glances.
And there's another layer to the Peter connection that I find really compelling. If this is essentially Peter's memoir, it is incredibly honest.
Incredibly so. If you read closely, you realize it does not paint Peter as a hero at all. In fact, he comes off looking pretty bad most of the time.
He's so impulsive.
He's impulsive, he speaks when he should really just be quiet, he misunderstands the mission constantly, and eventually he denies even knowing his leader just to save his own skin.
If I were writing a propaganda piece to make myself look good, I would definitely leave all that out.
You would edit out the embarrassing parts, right?
Yeah.
The fact that the embarrassing parts are left in and actually highlighted suggests that this is Peter's genuine confession. Is Peter telling the early believers, this is who Jesus is, and this is how much I didn't get it until it was too late. It adds a very human, very humble element to the whole thing.
Okay, so we have John Mark writing down Peter's memories. Now we really need to place this in time. When is this happening? What is the world like when this scroll is first being passed around?
This is absolutely crucial for understanding the tone of the book.
Yeah.
Most scholars place the writing sometime in the late 60s AD. Let's say roughly between 60 and 70 AD.
And for those of us who aren't Roman history buffs, can you paint the picture of the late 60s? Because this isn't exactly a peaceful time of philosophical debate, right?
Not at all. This is a time of absolute terror for the early believers. We are looking at the reign of the Emperor Nero in Rome. Now, Nero is infamous for a very good reason. In 64 AD, there was a massive fire that destroyed a huge part of the city. 10 out of the 14 districts were just completely gutted.
And the rumor was that Nero started it himself, right? To clear space for his new building projects.
That was the rumor on the street, yeah. People were furious they had lost their homes, their businesses. Nero, sensing that the mob was turning against him, needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame to deflect all that anger. So he chose a small, misunderstood religious group, the Christians.
So this isn't just people making fun of them. This is state-sponsored violence.
It is horrific stuff. The Roman historian Tacitus writes about this period. He describes believers being arrested, harshly persecuted, and made to suffer terribly. Some were even set on fire to serve as lights in Nero's gardens at night. They were losing their lives in the most unimaginable ways.
Wow, that is an absolute nightmare.
It is the darkest moment they had faced up to that point. And simultaneously, on the other side of the Mediterranean, down in Judea, tensions were boiling over between the Jewish people and the Romans. This would eventually lead to a full-blown war and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD.
So the world is effectively falling apart.
The world is on fire, both literally in Rome and politically in Jerusalem. And into this atmosphere of sheer crisis, Mark writes a book. And what is the book about? It's about a man who was arrested by the Romans, made to suffer deeply, and put to an end as a criminal against the state.
When you put it that way, it really changes how I hear the story. It must have been terrifying to be a believer then. You're holding a document about a man who was given a state-sanctioned end, while the state is currently taking the lives of people for following him. It is not a safe book.
Exactly. It raises the stakes completely. This wasn't written for people sitting comfortably in a university library debating theology. It was written for a community experiencing extreme suffering. It's survival literature. It's a manual on how to face the darkness.
Which brings us to the audience. You mentioned Rome. Is that who this was written for?
The general consensus is that it was written primarily for Gentile believers, meaning non-Jewish individuals most likely living right there in Rome.
How do we know they were Gentiles? Are there clues in the text?
There are major clues embedded right in the text. The author goes out of his way to explain Jewish customs. For example, in chapter 7, he actually pauses the narrative to explain the ritual hand-washing traditions of the religious leaders. If he were writing to a Jewish audience, he wouldn't need to explain that at all. They would already know it intimately.
Right, that would be like explaining what a hamburger is to an American. You just wouldn't bother.
Precisely. He also translates Aramaic phrases.
Yeah.
Jesus spoke Aramaic. When he raises the little girl and says, Talitha cum, the text immediately notes, which means, little girl, get up. He's translating for an audience that speaks Greek or Latin, not the local language of Judea.
So if you combine all that, you have a Gentile audience in Rome facing Nero's wrath, terrified and confused. This document is meant to be pastoral.
He wants to encourage a suffering community by showing them a savior who also experienced extreme suffering. He's telling them, you are not following a winner in the worldly sense. You are following a God who walked the exact path of pain before you. He knows what you are going through because the Roman government did the exact same thing to him.
That is profound. It really turns the text into a survival guide. So thinking about that, what kind of genre are we looking at? Because I know genre sounds like a boring English class term, but it really matters here.
It matters immensely. When you pick this up, what kind of book do you think you're reading?
Well, it feels like a biography, obviously. It's the story of a life. But it's different. It doesn't talk about his childhood. We don't know what he looked like. We don't know his inner thoughts most of the time.
Right. It lacks almost everything we would expect in a modern biography. But in the ancient world, it fits perfectly into the category of ancient biography. These didn't focus on psychological development or childhood anecdotes. They focused on the subject's core character, usually revealed through their public actions and, crucially, their final days.
Oh, so how they met their end defines who they were.
Exactly. A huge portion of this text is devoted strictly to the final week of his life. Some scholars have even called it a narrative of his final suffering, with a long introduction attached. Everything drives toward the cross. But there's a twist to the genre. Right in the very first sentence, it says, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
That word gospel, we hear it so much in church settings that it just sounds like religious vocabulary.
It does to us today. But in the first century, that Greek word, euangelion, was not a religious word at all. It was a highly political one. It was the technical term used for imperial announcements.
Imperial, like from the Roman Empire.
Yes. If Caesar had a son, or if the Roman army won a massive victory on the frontier, heralds would be sent out to proclaim the euangelion, the good news of Caesar. There's actually an ancient inscription concerning the birthday of Caesar Augustus that says, the birthday of the god Augustus was the beginning for the world of the euangelion.
Oh, wow. So he's essentially co-opting the language of the empire.
He's being incredibly subversive. He's taking their language and saying, the real good news isn't about Caesar winning a war or having a birthday. The true royal announcement that actually changes the world is about Jesus.
That is bold, especially if you're writing from Rome right under Nero's nose.
It's practically treasonous. It sets up a true king in direct opposition to the political powers of the world. It's a clash of kingdoms from the very first sentence. He's saying, Caesar isn't Lord, Jesus is.
So let's look at how this story is actually structured. You mentioned it moves fast. How does the author organize the action to get the subversive message across to the reader?
You can visualize the book in 3 clear movements, or
Hmm.
acts. It's almost entirely geographical. The author is a very spatial storyteller.
Okay, walk us through those 3 acts.
Act 1 is set in Galilee. This covers chapters 1 through 8, roughly. This is up in the north. The main characters moving from town to town. And the big question driving this entire section is simply, who is this? We see miracles, we see authority, we see massive crowds. It's very exciting.
So Act 1 is all about identity. Who is this guy?
Right. Then Act 2 is the way. This is chapters 8 through 10. They are literally on the road traveling south from Galilee toward Jerusalem. The question shifts here. It's no longer just who is he, but rather what does it actually mean for him to be the Messiah? This is where the teaching gets very intense and the disciples get, well, very confused.
So Act 2 is the journey and defining the actual mission.
Yes. And then Act 3 is Jerusalem, chapters 11 through the end. This is the climax. The confrontation with the religious leaders, the arrest, the trial, the events of the cross, and the empty tomb. The central question here is, how does he become king?
And the answer, surprisingly, is through his profound sacrifice.
Exactly. And holding all these acts together is the pacing. We talked about it feeling like an action movie. The author's absolute favorite word in Greek is euthys.
Euthys, what does that translate to?
It's usually translated as immediately. Immediately the Spirit drove him into the wilderness. Immediately they left their nets. Immediately the illness left him. He uses it over 40 times in a very short span.
It just sounds so breathless, like he can't get the story out fast enough.
It creates this intense sense of urgency. Notice there is no nativity story here. No shepherds, no wise men, no quiet moments in a manger. The main character just bursts onto the scene as a grown man at the Jordan River, and the clock immediately starts ticking.
Yeah.
It's like the author saying, we do not have time for the backstory. The rescue mission has already begun.
So let's dive into that first movement, the Galilee years. You said the question is, who is he? How is he presented in these early chapters?
He is presented as a figure of overwhelming, almost terrifying authority. That is the key word, authority. In the other accounts, we get a lot of long sermons. Think of Matthew with chapters of just talking. But here we get some teaching, sure, but the focus is heavily on what he does.
Action over words. Show, don't tell.
Exactly. He commands spirits, and they obey him. They're terrified of him, actually. He speaks to the wind and the waves, and nature itself calms down. He touches the sick, and they are restored. He even forgives sins. which in that culture was something only God could do. The author is stacking up all this evidence that this is not just a smart teacher, this is someone with cosmic power.
But there is something really weird that happens in this section. I noticed it when I was reading. He performs these incredible acts, but then he tells people to shush.
Ah, the shushing, yes. It is everywhere in these early chapters.
Right. He silences the spirits who try to shout out who he is. He restores a man with a skin disease and says, "See that you say nothing to anyone." He raises a girl and tells her parents strictly not to let anyone know. Why keep it a secret? I mean, if you have this power, wouldn't you want the PR? Wouldn't you want to build a massive movement?
This is one of the most famous puzzles in biblical studies. Scholars call it the Messianic secret.
Messianic secret. Okay, unpack that for us. Why the secrecy?
We have to remember the cultural context we talked about earlier. In the first century, the word Messiah carried a massive amount of baggage. It wasn't just a spiritual term for a savior, it was a political hand grenade.
How so?
For most people then, Messiah meant a military conqueror. They were actively looking for a new King David, someone who would raise an army, kick out the occupying Roman forces, and restore their political borders and their glory.
So they were basically expecting a
General, a revolutionary leader with a sword.
Got it. And that's exactly what he wasn't there to do.
Yeah. Right. If he had walked around shouting, "I am the Messiah," everyone would have immediately reached for their weapons. They would have tried to draft him into a violent political revolution right then and there.
So he had to keep his identity under wraps, or at least manage the release of information carefully to redefine what the word meant before people tried to force him into their mold.
Exactly. He had to show them that being the Messiah meant serving and ultimately giving his life, not just military victory. He couldn't let the title loose until he had completely redefined it by his actions.
That makes perfect sense. He's avoiding a misunderstanding that could completely derail the entire mission. It's almost like brand management. He has to deconstruct the title before he can formally claim it.
It is brand management, in a way. And the secrecy builds and builds until we hit the absolute pivot point of the entire narrative, chapter 8. This is the center hinge. Everything before leads up to this, and everything after flows directly from it.
We're talking about Caesarea Philippi.
Caesarea Philippi. Now, the geography matters immensely here. This is a place way up north. It was a major center of pagan worship. There was a massive rock face with a grotto dedicated to the god Pan. There were temples to Caesar built right there. It's a very Gentile, very pagan backdrop.
So he takes his closest followers away from their home turf, right into the shadow of these massive pagan shrines.
Exactly. And against that backdrop, he finally asked them the question we mentioned at the start. Who do people say that I am?
And they give him all the rumors, John the Baptist, Elijah, maybe a prophet.
And then he turns it directly on them. But who do you say that I am? And Peter, good old impulsive Peter, steps up and nails it. He says, "You are the Christ," meaning you are the Messiah.
It's the big A+ moment.
It is. It's the first time a human in the narrative gets the title right. The spirits have said it, the narrator has said it, but this is the first time a follower says it. But, and here's the twist, immediately after Peter gets the title right, Jesus begins to explain what the title actually means. He teaches them that he must suffer many things, be rejected by the leaders, and lose his life.
And Peter does not like that at all.
Not one bit. Peter actually takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. Just think about the sheer audacity of that. Rebuking the man you just declared is the Messiah. It would be like correcting a master surgeon in the middle of a complex operation.
It really shows how deep that military expectation went. Peter's essentially saying, no, you're the Messiah. That means you win. You don't suffer. You crush the Romans. You don't let them crush you.
Exactly. Peter wants the glory without the suffering. He wants the crown without the cross. And the response he gets is just devastating. Jesus turns, looks at the other disciples, and says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan."
Ouch. Going from "you are the Christ" to "get behind me, Satan" in 5 minutes. That has to be the steepest drop in approval rating in history.
It's incredibly harsh, but it shows how astronomically high the stakes are. Satan literally translates to adversary. He is saying that Peter's mindset, the mindset of worldly winning, of power, of self-preservation, is actually the mindset of the enemy. It directly opposes the divine plan of redemption, and that plan inherently involves sacrifice.
This really marks the transition into the second movement, right? The section you called the way.
Yes. Now they are on the road, headed to Jerusalem. And this middle section, chapters 8, 9, and 10, is fascinating because it follows a very distinct repeating pattern. 3 separate times he predicts his impending suffering, And 3 separate times, the disciples completely miss the point and do something totally ridiculous.
Give us an example of how they miss it.
Well, right after he predicts his passing the second time, the disciples get into an argument on the road. And what are they arguing about? They're arguing about which one of them is the greatest.
They're really not getting it.
They are spiritually deaf at this point. He is talking about giving up everything for the world, the ultimate self-sacrifice, and they are arguing about the seating chart in the new royal palace. Or think about James and John. They actually come up and ask for the seats at his right and left hand in his glory.
Again, they're thinking about cabinet positions in the new administration. They want the power and the prestige.
Right, and he looks at them and says, "You don't know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup I drink?" He is talking about the cup of suffering, and they just boldly say, "We can." They have absolutely no clue. They think he means a victory cup at a banquet.
It's painful to read, but also, it's relatable, isn't it? Who doesn't want to be great?
Yeah.
Who doesn't want to be secure and powerful?
It's profoundly human. We are all Peter, James, and John in that moment. And this leads directly to what many scholars consider the signature verse of the entire book.
Yeah.
Mark chapter 10, verse 45. He sits them down and says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
That is the upside-down kingdom right there in one sentence.
It really is. In the Roman world, and let's be honest, in our modern world too, greatness is defined by how many people serve you, how much power and leverage you can exert over others. But he completely flips it. Greatness is defined by how many people you serve, by how much you are willing to give away for the sake of others.
There's a literary device you mentioned in our pre-show notes about this specific section, the irony of sight.
Oh, I love this detail. The author is a brilliant writer. He isn't just throwing random stories together. He is carefully crafting a message. So this entire middle section, the way, is bookended by 2 distinct healings of blind men.
Okay, tell us about the first one.
At the very beginning of the journey, he heals a blind man, but it actually takes 2 tries. It's a gradual healing. After the first touch, the man says, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then he touches him again, and he finally sees clearly.
Which mirrors the disciples, right?
Exactly. It's a living metaphor. The disciples see that he's the Messiah, but their vision is blurry. They see him as a political winner, like a tree walking. They don't understand the full, clear picture yet. It takes time and more teaching for them to see clearly. Then, at the very end of the journey, right before they enter Jerusalem, he meets another blind man, Bartimaeus.
Bartimaeus, he's the one sitting by the roadside begging.
Right. And Bartimaeus, the complete outsider, starts shouting out to him for mercy. The crowd tries to shush him. There's that silencing theme again, but he just shouts louder. He actually sees who Jesus is more clearly than the inner circle does. He is healed, and the text specifically notes that Bartimaeus followed him on the way.
So the outsider, the beggar, gets it immediately while the insiders are still fumbling around in the dark?
Precisely. It's a subtle warning to the reader. Don't assume that just because you are on the inside, just because you know the religious vocabulary, that you truly see what's happening. It takes humility to really see. The disciples act blind. The actual blind beggar is the one with true vision.
So now we move into Act 3, Jerusalem, the final week.
This is where the pace slows way down. The camera really zooms in. We have the entry into the city, the conflict in the temple, the debates with the religious leaders. But every single scene is barreling straight toward the events of the cross.
And you said earlier that in this specific account, the cross is presented as a coronation.
Yes. This is the great heartbreaking paradox of the book. Throughout the narrative, people have wondered, is he the king? At his trial, the Roman governor asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" The soldiers mock him. They put a purple robe on him. They weave a crown out of thorns and force it onto his head. They salute him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews."
They're making fun of him. To them, it's just cruel satire.
They think they are mocking a fake king. They think it's a joke. But the author is showing the reader that this actually is his true coronation. The cross is his throne. The thorns are his true crown. This is how true divine power reigns not by violent force, but by self-giving love that absorbs the violence of the world. He is never more kingly than when he is giving his life for his people.
It's heartbreaking and beautiful at the exact same time. And there's this moment right at the end when he finally breathes his last.
The passing of Jesus. The sky turns completely dark in the middle of the day. The massive veil in the temple, the curtain separating the most holy place, tears violently from top to bottom, symbolizing that the barrier between the divine and humanity is completely gone. But look at who reacts. The disciples have all fled. Peter has denied him. The religious leaders are mocking him. But standing right there, facing him, is a Roman centurion,
The enemy, the executioner.
the guy whose daily job it was to oversee state-sanctioned ends. He looks at this broken man who has just given his life with a loud cry, and he says the most important line in the entire book. Truly, this man was the Son of God.
That gives me chills every time. Why is it him? Why have the centurion be the one to say it?
I think the author is telling us something profound. You can see the miracles and still be confused. You can hear the brilliant teaching and still be offended. But you only truly recognize who he is when you look at his ultimate sacrifice. It's in his vulnerability, his self-giving love, that his true nature shines through most clearly. And it takes a complete outsider, a Gentile, remember the audience in Rome, to finally say it out loud.
It's a direct message to those believers in Rome. Even your oppressors, even the centurions of the empire can come to see the truth.
Exactly. It's a massive glimmer of hope in a very dark time. It validates that this message is for the Gentiles too.
But then the story ends. And we really have to talk about the ending, because if you open a physical Bible today, you might see a footnote or a section in brackets that says something like the longer ending of Mark. But the scholarly consensus is that the original manuscript stops at verse 8 of chapter 16.
That's right. The earliest and most reliable manuscripts we have, the ones scholars trust the most, end abruptly at verse 8, and it is an absolute shocker of an ending.
Walk us through what happens.
So it's Sunday morning. The women go to the tomb. They are expecting to find a body. Instead, they find the heavy stone rolled away. There is a young man dressed in white inside. He tells them, he has risen, he is not here, see the place where they laid him.
Good news. Literally the best news possible.
It is the ultimate evangelion. The young man tells him to go tell the disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of them to Galilee. But then, listen to verse 8. This is how the original document ends. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
And that's it. Just the end.
That is it. In the original Greek, it literally ends with a conjunction. It ends on the word for. It's like ending a sentence with because, and then just total silence.
They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Why? Why would anyone end a story like that? It feels unfinished. It feels like the last page of the scroll just fell off.
It feels wildly unresolved. And for centuries, people were deeply uncomfortable with it. That is exactly why later scribes likely added those longer endings. The parts where he appears to people, gives the final commission, the stuff about snakes and poison to tidy things up, to make it sound more resolved like the other accounts. But honestly, I think the abrupt ending is absolute literary genius.
How so? Because it just sounds frustrating to me.
Well, think about it logically. If the women truly said nothing to anyone, ever, we wouldn't be reading the book. Obviously, they eventually spoke up. But by ending the narrative in silence and fear, the author breaks the fourth wall.
Oh, he pushes the problem out to the reader.
Exactly. The written story stops, but the reality continues off the page. He is essentially turning to the reader, to those Roman believers facing Nero, and to us today, and saying, okay, the tomb is empty, the women are terrified, the disciples have failed, what are you going to do?
Wow. Will you speak, or will you be silent?
Will you flee in fear, or will you proclaim the risen king? It forces the audience to finish the story with their own lives. It's a cliffhanger that demands a personal response. It's not just a neat history lesson, it's a summons.
That is powerful. It's not just a story you passively consume, it's an invitation you have to either accept or reject.
It's a profound challenge, especially for a persecuted community in Rome. The text is asking them, are you going to let fear silence you, or will you trust the one who conquered the grave and goes before you?
Let's zoom out for a second. We've looked at a lot of the details in the narrative flow, but what is the big picture here? How does this specific book fit into the larger story of the biblical narrative and traditional Christian beliefs?
There are two big theological threads I want to pull on here. First is the idea of the new Exodus.
Exodus, like Moses in Egypt, the splitting of the sea.
Yes. The book actually opens by quoting the ancient prophet Isaiah about a voice crying in the wilderness to prepare the way. This is deep Exodus language. Just as God led his people out of slavery in Egypt through the wilderness to a promised land, this account is showing us that Jesus is leading a new Exodus.
But he's not leading them out of Egypt.
No, not out of political slavery to Rome, but out of the ultimate slavery to sin, to evil, to the finality of the grave itself. He is the new Moses, but he's also the Lord himself, coming to personally rescue his people.
And what's the second thread?
The titles. We've talked a lot about Messiah, but his absolute favorite title for himself in this book is Son of Man.
He does use that a lot. the Son of Man must suffer.
Right. It comes from the Old Testament book of Daniel, chapter 7. In Daniel, the Son of Man is this exalted cosmic figure who represents true humanity and is given an eternal kingdom by God. It's a title of massive glory and victory.
So it's a huge power move to use it.
It is. But he fuses it with the concept of the suffering servant from Isaiah. He says, the Son of Man came to serve and give his life. He takes the figure of ultimate cosmic power and directly combines it with the figure of ultimate suffering. He completely redefines what divine power looks like.
And then there is the title, Son of God.
Right. That title appears at very key structural moments. The very first verse, at his baptism when a voice from heaven speaks it, at the moment on the mountain when his appearance changes and the voice speaks again, and finally at the cross when the centurion speaks it. Now remember the Roman context we established. Who else claimed to be the Son of God?
Caesar, it was literally stamped on their coin.
Caesar. So every single time the author uses that title, it's a direct challenge to the political powers of the day. It's saying, Caesar claims to be the son of the gods, but look at this man who willingly suffers for his enemies. He is the true Son of God.
It is so layered. It's political, it's deeply spiritual, it's historical. So bringing it to today, for us, we aren't facing Nero, thankfully. But what does this book say to modern disciples? How does it apply to modern life and growth?
I think this is genuinely the best account for people who are going through hard times. If your life is perfect and everything is sunny, this book might feel a bit dark or frantic. But if you are suffering, if you feel like God is absent, this is your book.
Why is that?
Because it strips away all the false glory of religion. It shows us that following him isn't a guarantee of prosperity or health or safety. It says very clearly, following me means taking up a cross. It's a life of self-denial and service. But it also promises that God is deeply present in the suffering. You don't have to be winning in life to be close to God. He was a man of sorrows, so he intimately understands yours.
That is a massive comfort. And honestly, I find a lot of comfort in the disciples too.
The disciples in this book are my absolute favorite because they are just so incredibly bad at being disciples.
They really are. They are dense, they are fearful, they argue over petty things, they run away when things get hard.
And yet, he still uses them. He doesn't fire them. He keeps teaching them. He restores them. This book is a great comfort to imperfect believers. It shows that discipleship is a clumsy, stumbling process. It's about following, failing, getting picked back up, and following again. It's not about being the perfect shiny hero. It's about staying on the road with him, even when you don't fully understand.
That is really encouraging. It takes the pressure off to be perfect and puts the focus entirely back on just continuing to follow.
Exactly. It's about persistence, not perfection.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's land the plane with some key takeaways. If the listener remembers absolutely nothing else, what are the big things they should hold on to from this text?
I'd say takeaway number one is Jesus as the suffering servant. We have to let this book redefine our view of power. Real power looks like service. Remember chapter 10, verse 45, greatness is giving your life away for others. If we miss that, we miss him entirely.
That's huge. For me, I think takeaway number 2 is that the cross is the key. You can't just like him for his moral teaching or his amazing miracles. To truly understand his identity, you have to look at the sacrifice. That's where the centurion saw the truth, and that's where we see it too. It isn't just a tragedy, it is the ultimate revelation of who God is.
Beautifully said. And I'd add takeaway number 3, the story isn't over. That abrupt ending, the silence and fear of the women at the tomb, it challenges us directly. We are living in the extended ending of this book. The silence of the women didn't last forever. They eventually spoke. The tomb was empty. And now the baton is passed to us. Will we speak? Will we serve? The story continues through our lives.
I love that. It really makes me want to go back and read the whole thing in one sitting.
You definitely should. It only takes about an hour and a half to read aloud. It is shorter than a modern movie and infinitely more life-changing.
Well, thank you to everyone for joining us in the lab today. We hope this deep dive helps you see this amazing text with fresh eyes.
Absolutely. It is a wild ride, but it truly is the best news in the world.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please check out the rest of our series where we explore how the other biblical authors tell the story differently, book by book. And if you want to go deeper, connect with us and other learners.
Like, share, and for those who want more, check out OpenBibleLab on School. That's SKOOL, our free-to-join Bible study community.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next